Hello, my name is Zhatelier, and welcome back for another episode of this Supreme Ruler Ultimate tutorial. And in previous episode we went through the diplomacy and espionage stuff. Mostly surface scratch, although it did last for a fair bit. But anyway, this time we are going to look through the economy, production, and how to build buildings. So, what we're going to go through first is the finance, and whenever you start a new game, one thing that you will probably want to do is lock your minister from taking new bond, just so that you don't suddenly realize that, oh crap, I got trillions in loans, what the hell has the minister been doing? So that kind of limits the damage that the AI can do for you, but having the AI minister do most of the things for you can be okay, especially when you are new to the game. It will give you time to learn the things on your own pace. But since, well, I'm not quite that new into this game anymore. But there's other options. You can minister from social spending, from taxation, and repairs and construction. So if you leave those on, the minister will do the taxation and social spending and such, and will build new stuff. But we're gonna lock the repairs and construction at least, just so that we can have a bit of a control on what is being built and such. Now, the second thing is the income report. You can see where most of your money is coming from. This treasury is basically your taxes and such. Then there's production, which is domestic sales, basically, for the products. We're going to go through what the domestic sales will be. Then there's research, which is usually not going to bring you money, let's be real here, and defense. Then on the expenditure report you can see the state, which is, for example, the intelligence and UN membership, which actually, well, technically shouldn't be a thing at this point. But there is the League of Nations or something like that. That would be part there. Then there's the treasury, for example, the social services, if you're constructing stuff, and the maintenance of facilities, and loan repayments, interest for the loans, and overdraft interests. Then production is just the cost for doing the productions. Research is, of course, the research process, and then research efficiency, which we will be touching more on the next episode. And then there's the defense, like military salaries, unit production, and so forth. Then there's the trades. You can either go through units sold or the money moved. And, for example, last day's trades, we can see that we sold some power, military goods, industrial goods, and metal ore. Not much for most of them. And then there's the coal that we bought quite a bit. Then taxation. There's low income tax, high income tax, corporate tax, small business, sales tax, unemployment, property tax, and pension tax. And basically you can fiddle around with these. They will have different effects on income and GDP, how much people will be consuming your product and such. Basically how much the money available for the people is, so that they will be spending that one way or another. Then there's a social spending. There's healthcare, education, infrastructure, environment, family subsidies, law enforcement, cultural subsidies, and social assistance. And you just basically drag this bar one way or another. And usually one thing that is good to have is fairly high healthcare, because that means that you will at least get a lot of people. Then infrastructure is also fairly important. That increases the supply and how well your manufacturers produce, therefore, and so forth. And of course, when you increase the social spendings, that will also create some jobs. So if you have high unemployment, that's one way to get that lower. Of course, at the same time, if you have the social spendings too high, then you will have a much less workers for your mines and agriculture stuff and factories and so forth. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Of course, as a democracy, those will also have effect on domestic approval rating, and as a democracy, of course we're not a democracy on this run, but you will need to have high enough approval rating to win elections, and elections happen every 4 years, I believe, or something like that, which means that you can have a low approval rating for the first 2 years, but then you'll basically need to start improving it quite significantly just to stay in office if you don't want to become a dictatorship, which will hurt your relations with other nations and so forth. And then, of course, over here you can see the social rating, tax rate, and then you can see the how much you got debt right now. We don't have any. We have a decent credit rating. We don't actually have any loans, so there's no interest rating right now, but it does show that if we took new loans, the interest rate would be 3.7% right now, and max available per day is currently 10 million. But hopefully we don't need to touch the loans, so that's a good thing there. Then you can see the income, expenses, and surplus or deficit over here, the trades and treasury. And then, of course, down below over here, there's the infrastructure. So if you want, you can build rails or roads. And since we activated it, there's also the tool for removing, for example, if there's just, frankly, badly placed roads and such, you can get rid of those. Or if you want to kind of cut the enemy moving in from somewhere, you can delete rows from a certain section just to make the advancing slower and making them work to get their supplies in there and so forth. And since we talk a fair bit about the supplies already in this tutorial series, let's go through it a little bit. So supplies, you can see on the province here. Currently this hex, well, I would say province, but it's probably hex, it's a bit apt description. So it has 50% supply, which means that it will be about, if there was a factory, for example, here, it would be about 50% efficient. And if there's 0% supplies, you can't build anything there. And if you have supplies, then your troops will be able to regain their strength and so forth. And we're going to go through that in episode 5 a bit more detail. But it basically affects how effectively things will work, and upgrading the infrastructure spending will actually increase how far the supply will spread, as far as I know. And then there's things that provide supply is, well, all the towns and complexes and such provide a little bit, and then it spreads to surrounding areas, and if it piles up a little bit higher, then yeah, it will be a bit higher. I mean, for example, in Torino is 52%, Genoa is also, well, that's 56%. I'm pretty sure that Rome has, actually it doesn't have all that high, it's 42 right now. It's probably bound to change once we let the time run. But improving the supply is good. Then there's the supply depot, which if we go through, you can find it in any of these, industrial, military, or urban. We're going to go with industrial though, just because it's the first on the list. So supply depot, it will add a certain amount of supply. Then there's airfields will add some, seaports and sea piers will add some, ports will add more than piers, and same for the air bases will add more than airfields, and barracks will add supply. And I think that's about it. Towns, complexes, barracks, airfields, ports, supply depots. Those are basically what add supplies into the map, and that will increase productivity and capability. And there's also, if you don't have supplies somewhere, I mean, this is more portion of the military episode, but we're going to quickly go through it. So if your hex doesn't have any supplies, but the neighboring enemy hex does have supplies, then the hex will flip to their control, because you don't really have ways to control the place if you can't really send anything there. But anyway, let's continue with this episode's main focus, which is the economy and production. So we went through the infrastructure production. The roads are a bit more efficient in spreading the supply, for example, and the units might move a bit slower than on rails, but they will be able to fight while they're going, if I remember correctly. And it's like roads cost more, but they will do the work a bit better than rails. I mean, rails are good for having a quick transport access between two places, but it will not spread as much of the supply as roads do. And then let's go to the resources now. So there's quite a few different resources available. There's agriculture, there's rubber, there's timber, petroleum, or could be referred as oil, coal, metal ore, uranium, electric power, military goods, industrial goods, and consumer goods. And the goods over here are something that you produce in factories. The remaining of the stuff is something that you can, or are one way or another from the map. I mean, electric power is a bit of a different, because, well, actually, we can go through the filters, commodities. So, for example, agriculture, we can see that there's a fair bit available. The darker the red, the more there's available. For example, there's quite a bit of agriculture available. Then if we go for rubber, we don't actually have any rubber here, so that's something that we need to buy from elsewhere in the market. And there is ways to do that synthetically, but it's rather expensive. Then coal, I believe it doesn't switch that, no. Okay, so actually petroleum, there's some oil that you can get from sea hexes, but currently we don't have the knowledge to do that. And then there's of course a little bit over here in Libya, which is our colony. So we do get access to some oil, but of course that would require us to basically invest in building some more oil fields here. But that would give us some money. Well, not money directly, but oil, and then we would have to buy a bit less from elsewhere. The way that the colonies work is you'll basically get to buy their resources a bit cheaper than anyone else, and do that before anyone else does, so you are the priority that they will sell to. But if you don't need the resources that they're selling, then they will sell them to elsewhere. Then we went through the oil, and then let's go coal. So we got a fair bit here in the Alps, which is coal is used a lot in electricity production, especially early on. The coal power plants are the primary one. Later on there's nuclear plants and oil power plants, and then there's like renewable energy and hydropower plants and so forth. But hydropower you can only build in certain areas. It's very expensive. It doesn't take any materials afterwards, but it does have a upkeep cost, and it doesn't produce all that much. I mean, it produces a decent amount, but it's just roughly one big hydropower plant produces the same amount of power as a large coal power plant, more or less. So the coal power is quite useful early on, but it does require coal for it to work. Of course, coal is generally speaking rather cheap to buy, so that's not too bad. Then metal ore is used in a lot of the goods produced, and so forth. I mean, we're going to go through that a little bit more. Then the uranium is for, well, nuclear weapons and nuclear power mostly, and that's primary uses for it. And especially in the earlier scenarios, it's not really being used. Everyone will just sell it to somewhere. Then there's electricity, where we can see that we got some hydropower over here, and it's pretty good hydropower actually. Then there's population. You can see kind of how densely populated some areas are. For example, if we have a look at the deserts around here, there's not much people, as you would expect. Whereas our main country here has a decent density of population. And the population will then require certain materials. For example, agriculture is something that if we open this, we can see. So civilian consumption is 52 tons, 52,000 tons of agricultural products per day. Then rubber is used by consumer goods and military goods. Timber is used by civilians. So basically, agriculture and timber are both that the civilians will use. Nothing else really other than that uses them, but civilian usage is quite important because making sure that they can get enough of those will keep them happy, will keep them reproducing, and then so forth. So it is important, and you can also get quite a bit of money from the domestic sales of those things, as well as selling it to other nations that can't produce them enough, or won't be producing them enough. Then petroleum is used by pretty much everything. It's going to be used by industrial goods quite a bit, military goods, consumer goods, power production to some degree, if you got oil power plants, and then civilians will also use oil. Then there's the coal, which is used by power, industrial goods, and civilians. Then there's metal ores, which is used only by the goods production, but all of the goods production will use some metal ore. Uranium is currently not used by anything in this save at least, and electric power is used industrial goods, consumer goods, military goods, civil demand, and if you're doing synthetic oil or rubber or something like that, that will also use a lot of electric power. That's something to keep in mind. And you can't really store the electric power. You can either produce it, which we are actually producing quite a bit, and then you can sell the excess to someone who doesn't produce it, or you don't sell it, and you can always have some controls over that. And speaking of controls, after we've gone through the goods, I mean, the goods are basically just consuming. They take raw materials and they produce. Military consumes military goods. Industrial goods are used in building constructions and by the other two goods. So that's something that you need to keep in mind, that you need in production of the other goods. And of course, military goods is used by the military and in certain military constructions. And it's something that you want to keep in stock quite a bit, because your military units will actually run through your military goods quite quickly when they are fighting. And then there's the consumer goods, which is mostly for civilian demand, but it's also a good way to earn money by exporting the civilian goods, because everyone needs them, more or less. So that's and the goods in general are a good way to earn money, whereas the raw materials are a bit less so. But certain materials can be very useful. For example, oil, you can earn a lot of money, or rubber, you can get a lot of money, because a lot of nations won't be able to produce them. Now then, there's the cabinet. Again, you can select custom priorities. You can go through the list there. Most things are rather obvious, and it will give you kind of details on what it will do when you hover over the text here, or the row here. But we're not gonna touch those. Then industrial controls. If you, for example, if you select military goods, you can select that. Okay, since we're not really using all that much of stuff, the certain stuff. If you're playing a peaceful nation, for example, you don't really need to, or you want to save some money from the production. For example, production cost for military goods is rather high, so you can just have 100% of demand or capacity, or you can have like 26% of capacity and so forth. That's something that you can fine-tune the controls, and if you let the AI control these, then it will probably do something like that every now and then, just to save up some money. And it's not bad. I mean, the AI will do the things here. Sometimes it will do a bit weird stuff, but for the most part, if you're starting just from scratch the game, you really don't have much experience, just let the AI control most of the things. I say most of the things, not all things though. For example, the bonds that we went through, you don't want the AI to do too much. But you can also see the domestic price on the things that the domestic population uses. And over here, for example, the domestic price for consumer goods is currently 105%, and that 105% is from the production cost. Basically meaning that plus 105% to the production cost, and you'll get that. Basically, make sure that you're not losing money to the production and selling the products to your population. And then, since we already touched the production cost there, you can also see the market price that is currently for those. So we're making a lot more money selling these to our population than to the markets abroad. And generally speaking, you will want to keep this higher than the market price, because if you are not producing enough, you need to buy the products from the market, and then you'll be selling those to the domestic population. So even then you'll want to keep the domestic price higher, just so that you're not making a deficit for trying to provide your citizens. And of course, making sure that the people get their needs met, or basically they get enough consumer goods and food, timber, coal, oil, electricity, and so forth. That will first of all increase the domestic approval rating. Then if you lower the domestic prices, that will mean that there will be a bit higher demand, because they will be able to buy more of the stuff. So that's something to keep in mind. If you want to, or if you are in a position where you can't really buy something from elsewhere and you're only producing so much, then upping the domestic price will hurt your domestic approval rating, but it will limit the consumption of the domestic portion of it, thus leaving you a bit more to use, or maybe a bit less to buy from elsewhere. So that's one way to control the economics, and there's a lot of ways. We're not going to go through all of them, how to affect that. And there's materials which we already went through. You can see how much your civilian population, for example, consumes the consumer goods or whatever. You can see what materials they're using for it, and so forth. Then world statistics, you can see who is the top importer or exporter or producer and consumer of the products or various resources. That's a good way to check that. Okay, I'm not producing any rubber. For example, if we select rubber and top production British Malay states, well, I won't be able to trade with them directly because they are a British colony, but I might be able to buy the rubber through United Kingdom. So therefore, you can look through here and find some interesting details, and you can also see how much they are producing. For example, British Malay states they're producing almost 9,000 tons of rubber per day, and their demand is barely anything, which means that they will be selling a lot. And of course it is primarily United Kingdom that is importing that, interestingly enough. Then you can see the market imports. You can manually bulk purchase through here. For example, sure, the max price, you can select that. If it goes, or the market price goes above that, we won't be buying, but you can easily select, like, okay, I want to buy 4,000 rubber. For example, if you are planning to go to a war and you want to, for example, build an oil reserve or something like that, you can then make sure that you are buying the oil beforehand, and of course then you need to make sure that the AI is not controlling it to sell the oil that you just bought. But that's one way that you can do it. It will give you the total cost for it. For example, 5,000 rubber would be $645,000, which is a fair bit, but it's not really all that much. It's still less than $1 million. And it will show the market price that it is right now, and then you can select buy as needed to up until, let's go for, I don't know, 120 or 130. And then similarly, there's the export stuff. We can, if we have, for example, a lot of extra stuff that we've accumulated, we can just select that, okay, we want to get at least this much from the sales, and then we'll sell this much. For example, is there something that we have a lot? For example, metal ore. The current minimum markup or minimum price per unit is 33 here, and we could lower it to $32 per ton, and then we can sell up to 10,000 tons, and will give us a certain amount of money. And the current markup is just tells you how much of profit you'd be making from the current production price, which means that at least it tells you that, hey, you'd be selling this on a deficit if it goes to -%. And you can have the auto sales, which means that you'll sell any surplus production, or you can say that, for example, if you're producing oil and you want to make sure that you'll at least keep some as a reserve, you'll lower the production, say we sell 90% of the surplus or something like that. And then there's the facility controls, which lets you build the stuff. For example, if you want to build the gas field, we select the oil, then we can select from this list. Well, we could even do the early oil to coal synth, which basically uses coal to make oil. And it uses quite a bit of coal to make a little bit of oil, so it's not very profitable. It has quite a bit of upkeep cost, if I remember correctly, so it's not great. But if you've got a lot of oil and you've got if you have a lot of coal and none of oil, then you can easily get at least some going. For example, if you're playing as Germany, that might be a way to go. But anyway, if we want to, we could build one of the gas fields either in here, which would be a little bit, but you can, if you hover over with that, you can see that this install capacity is 4,708 barrels per day is currently the amount that is produced there. If we have a look at this area, on the other hand, that's 3,700. If we were to build over here, that would be a somewhat good area, but on the other hand, if we have a look, it tells me that the supply is only 2%. So it doesn't, even if we place it there, it won't be producing all that much. So maybe we don't want to build oil over there right now until we get some better supplies in there. So what we'll do is we'll just install more here in near Ravenna. With a click there, and it will start building that. It will take a certain amount of resources to build it. It will take a certain amount of time. If we select this, actually if we hover over it, it tells 80 days remaining. If we hover over here, it will also show us, for example, how much industrial goods it still needs and so forth. So you can get kind of an idea there. And the industrial goods are of course taken, or it will increase the actual use of your industrial goods, or the demand for the industrial goods that you have internally and so forth. So that's, if you have a lot of industrial goods, you can build stuff somewhat easily. Of course, there will still be the cost for the workers and such, but you don't need to import the resources, which is always nice. Saves a lot of hassle. But that's basically how you build. There's a lot of options for different resources and such. Now, one thing that I haven't touched yet is how to prevent the AI from actually controlling, and that is here, the lock. So for example, if you don't want the AI to do anything about the military goods, I mean, we can, for example, make sure that, yeah, we're selling the excess. We'll maybe want to sell up to 90%. We'll keep the minimum unit or the price around here, and this is where it will accumulate. If we can't sell all of it, for example, the price goes too down or something like that, it will keep accumulating the extra surplus production over here, so that once the market price goes high enough, then it will sell again. And over here we'll buy as needed to, yeah, that's good. So we lock that. We'll actually lock the industrial, all the goods basically. For now, I think we'll let the resources be as they are for the time being. But that's pretty much the economy as far as I can tell. If I forgot something, just let me know in the comments and in the further episodes. Not during this first 5 episodes, but in the playthrough. We'll go through them in further detail. But other than that, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, bye bye.